is a integral part of my being and my culture, as I am Francophone. Often when people find out that French is my first language, they ask if I'm from Quebec or France. And I tell them, well, I'm from Stratford. And then they wonder, well, is that in Ontario somewhere? Where's that? Like, no, that's just south of the river, right by Bonnie Doon. And they're like, here, and that's your first language? Yeah, that's what we spoke at home. And so, it's hard to understand, but it was a thing that was very important in my family, was to keep the language, the culture, the tradition was passed down. And so one big part of preserving culture and language is to practice it at home. And so I highly encourage, if your first language is different than English, it's really important to talk to your kids with that language and not just assume that they're not going to learn English if you speak that language at home. Because English, we're in an English majority place, you just catch it. You don't learn it, you just catch it. It's like a disease, but a good disease. It's not a bad disease, Multilingualism is fantastic. And so, culture. So that's one way to approach preservation. So, there's been this tradition within my family to preserve our culture, to preserve our language. And speaking of family, I will talk a bit about my grandfather. My grandfather was a big influence to myself. He had such a joie de vivre, a very contagious laugh. And I have a picture of him. I have a picture of him that I developed in my darkroom. So this is from a negative. My grandmother was a photographer, as was my great-grandmother. And they've always preserved their negatives. They've made copies of their photos, but they've also preserved their negatives. And thankfully, with those negatives, I'm able to print pictures in the darkroom. If you haven't seen my studio, I have a studio around the corner, and it transforms into a dark room, or a red room, where everything goes dark, and then I put the red lights on, and then I can see a bit. And so this is my grandfather, Louis-Aimé Ares. And Louis-Aimé Ares originally came from Quebec, and he came out. He was supposed to be a priest, but because he was going to be the fourth priest in the family. And if that would have happened, then his father would have had a ring blessed by the Pope or something like that. But he was interested in doing other things than priesthood stuff. And so he went down to the States to study chiropractic studies, which was really like hocus pocus back in the 30s. So this guy went down into the States, did his chiropractic studies, and wanted to go back home, but chiropractic practice was actually illegal there. It was like a criminal activity. So then he came out west to visit one of his brothers in Saskatchewan, where he met my grandmother, Anna, and they started a family in Saskatchewan, had 8 kids, and they had the Tivoli Theatre in Arborfield, Saskatchewan. This was a fun time. Admission was 35 cents, 25 cents for students, and 10 cents for popcorn. It was fantastic. He would show movies like the Casablanca. Have you guys seen that? That's with Humphrey Bogart. Fantastic film. And so he did 2 things to market his theater. One thing that he did, he would put on a pair of speakers on his car and go around the neighboring towns and say, hey, this is what's happening at the theater, come and check it out. And the other thing he would do, he would take 60mm footage, this is where it ties into preservation, he would take footage of different community events. And so baseball games, sandwich lunches, car accidents, the first snowblower to come into town, it was a big deal, train derailment. And so all of these films he would take and then he would show before the feature films. And they left Saskatchewan, and the films came with him here in Edmonton. And they were preserved through the years. And I uncovered it with my grandmother down the way, down the line. And so he started to take films back in the 20s and continued to take films. And when I was thinking about preservation, I was thinking about one movie, which was really odd. When I was growing up, there was the graduation of my mom, So he was taking a Super 8 film, and then there's the demolition of a building downtown. And then there's kids on a swing set or something. And I always ask, well, what is that building? What's going on? And let me show you this footage. I will get lights. So thankfully, they had a cool basement. So for preserving film, it's important, and it's in a kind of a stable temperature place. So the basement is like 15 degrees all the time. It's kind of cool. And, some humidity, but not too much. Like in Quebec, my grandfather's film in Quebec, his films were all rotten. And I had to go through an extensive process to restore them, take out the mold. And then, but these films, they've survived intact in the basement of Alberta because it's dry and it's cool. And here we go. We have the graduation, and then downtown Edmonton. And so I would ask my grandparents, well, what is this building? And then they'd say, well, this is the old Woodwards building downtown. And what my grandparents would say, it was such a well-built building. In 1926, they built this store, and it was such a well-built building, they had such a tough time demolishing it. It took them a lot longer than anticipated, because I guess they hadn't built that in the design of the building to tear it down easy. And so, can anybody guess where this was shot from? Where would this footage be shot from? This is about 101 Street, 102 Avenue. The Citadel? Not quite. It was City Hall was the place to go. My grandparents often talked about there's two places to bring visitors to. The City Hall, where you could see all around the city, and then the Alamein Game Farm. The boxer that used to walk with a cheetah in the streets. So this was shot from my grandfather's office, which was in the Tegler building. I don't know if you guys have heard about the Tegler building. It was quite a monumental building of Edmonton. It had an Art Deco style to it, and this was captured in 1974, and my grandfather had a chiropractic office in the Tegler building from the 50s to the end of the 70s, and the Tegler building met this fate in 1982, but they didn't use this tool here. They just put a bunch of bombs on it and exploded the building. You can see the footage on the Google thing. Lots of dust, yes, and when my grandparents talked about the Tegler building, and there we go. We have the graduation, the destruction of a building in Edmonton, and then kids on the swing set. It was very odd to me, but I kind of grew up, watching these films, looking at slideshows, and with this, strange rhetoric that Edmonton kind of gets rid of its built heritage, which is sad. They found it pretty sad, and so. Yes, so that's the Tegler building. All right, I'm going to introduce you to my grandmother, because both of them are huge influences in my life. I had the opportunity to live with my grandmother for 8 years at the end of her days, and just love hearing all of her stories about the history of Saskatchewan, how they lived through the struggle of the dirty 30s. It was a struggle, how everybody had to survive. And so here I have a photo that I printed in the darkroom as well, from a negative taken by my great-grandmother, Hélène Courteau. And so this is my grandmother, Anna, which I've made many copies. Lots of my cousins have this picture, my sister. Yeah, this is Anna. And so, yes. And so my grandfather was talking about buildings getting torn down and how the Tegler was beautiful, and I wish I would have been able to see it. I was born in 85 and the building was demolished in 82, and so that's the sad thing about seeing built heritage go, is that we can't go and visit where things happened, where other people have been too. But Anyways, speaking of my grandmother, so my grandmother passed away, and she kept everything since the 30s, but kind of organized. She was a nurse, and so she would organize, classify things, she would annotate things, and my family was kind of in despair. They wanted to throw everything out, and they were like, and then the negatives were there, and they're like, oh, well, we got photos, why do we need the negatives? Let's just throw everything out, you know? Simplify, downsize. But then my sister and I were like, no, let's wait a second. We're interested to discover who the woman was that our grandmother was. We knew our grandmother as our grandmother, but she was more than that. She was a woman. She was an active member of her community, and she was on women's associations for women's rights and stuff like that. So we felt, oh, well, let's preserve these items. And then we started this project called Civikra. Does anybody know what Civikra means? Some do, but they're keeping quiet. Civikra is archives backwards. Because we archived our grandmother's stuff backwards. We started an Instagram account, we started a website, it's civikra.org, and there's things. My sister's great with the computer stuff. I don't do the computer stuff. But, so she's great with the computer stuff, and we started to make things accessible right away by Instagramming how we're going through these boxes, and we're finding these treasures from the 30s or the 20s, and then there's the film collection. I had a great aunt. She was a spinster. She worked for the National Defense. She was a clothing inspector. And so she would inspect the clothes, and she would accumulate her sick days, and she would go on vacation all over the world with a 16mm camera, and she would take footage of this stuff. Back in the 50s and the 60s, you can go to Paris before the cathedral got redone. It was super dark on the brick. And so, fascinating footage, and she would edit her films too. So really, and she would do stop motion animation of the titles coming in to introduce Egypt. All the letters were messed up, and then they eventually came together. I was like, wow, this lady knew what she was doing with film. And so, so my sister and I have started this project. So we're doing lots of conservation work, we're preserving our family heritage. Which is also part of our community's heritage, because they were involved in the community. And so, let's see here. Am I still on my notes? So, yes. So, I have a good segue to do. So, while I was living with my grandmother, there was these films. And I was like, oh, can we see this? How do we look at the images? They're so small. Why are these people trapped in these small boxes? And yes, I started the Tivoli Theatre. The Tivoli Theatre, I restarted the Tivoli Theatre with the original prices. I did a theatre in the basement with a bunch of couches, old couches, and then I'd invite friends and family to check out these films. So I brought these films back to life from the basement. And the word got around town that I was showing original films from the 1920s, and so I was introduced to Marlena Wyman. She was the film and media archivist at the Provincial Archives, and she was kind of worried that I was using these films, and who knows, maybe they're nitrate films, maybe they would have just caught on fire. So she made me more conscious. She made me think about preservation on a whole different level, using cotton gloves, and how to properly clean the projector, and all that jazz. And so, yes, I will show some slides and talk about Marlena and the Ortona some more and how I got to be here. But I'm going to show some slides of my grandmother that she took back in 1961 or 62. So I think I mentioned that my great-grandmother got into photography early in the days, like in 1920. And then my grandmother took up photography. And then my mother took up photography. My mother still is that awkward photographer that just gets in everybody's faces. And it's like, you kind of have to ask nowadays if people want to get their picture taken.
Take your pictures, guys. Thanks for the thought.
So I have. So my grandmother took a lot of slide photos, with Kodachrome. And Kodachrome is such a beautiful photography format. The colors are so vivid, but the chemistry to develop it is nasty. And so it's been discontinued. And so Kodachrome is really specific to an era in photography. There's a beginning and there's an end. I think it started back in 1938 or 1939, and that's actually why Viewmasters came into doing the 3D Viewmasters, because there was this film, this reversal slide film. So this is reversal slide film, 1961. So there's Easter in Zennon Park, Convention in Banff, and Parade in Edmonton, and then the game farm. But I'm just going to show you a few pictures of the Parade in Edmonton. It's really a timepiece of our history here in Edmonton. Let's see. Just going to switch projectors and off. And do the whole thing. Here we go. Hey, so this is on Jasper Avenue. And my notes, or my grandmother's notes, say this is Parade Exhibition. And so what my sister and I did with the Civigra project, we did an installation on Churchill Square for the Works Festival, where we recreated a 1950s kind of living room with old furniture, old lamps, and kind of bring back that atmosphere, the slideshow atmosphere. And we presented some of these photos. And as we can see here, there's the old CKUA building, and just a tremendous amount of people. And I don't know what those people are doing on the building. You wouldn't see that today. That's a liability issue. You could have a few police officers. And so, what was really fun about doing this installation on Churchill Square and showing these photos of our grandmother, our great aunt, and our great uncle is that people sat in and got to share their own stories of how they used to sit in slideshows or how they went to this parade. I had some people talking to me about the exhibition days. So apparently the exhibition days were the first time where you have this phenomenon of having women and men drinking booze in the same place. This happened once a year. Usually you had to go to hotels or something and you had to have a room booked or something. And so it was really interesting to hear how we used to do it here in Edmonton, how we used to drink, here in Edmonton. Yeah. It's a nice flow, I think. Yeah, the bands. And that's fine. It's just great to be. That must be such a great view on top of that. I'd love to get those photos. Come on. Crazy on the street. Decking out bicycles? Yeah.
Any idea where they're from?
Which group?
Those First Nations people?
Nope, I don't know. Here there's just parade exhibition and then down. I'm not sure.
Like I wonder if they could actually attribute the regalia. Yeah.
And that's why it's fun to do these presentations in public, because sometimes members of the public know some of these details. And so does anybody know? No? Well, yeah, I should go to Enoch and do a presentation there. That's Stagecoach 1800 is it? Edmonton, Calgary, 5 days, 200 miles. Probably twice as fast as the coach that came before it. So here I've got a few uncles in the band here. I think there's Paul-Emile, Richard, and Georges playing some instruments. My grandparents, when they came to Edmonton, they first settled in Jasper Place on 107th Street and 107th Avenue and 156th Street. And the house used to be right on the avenue.
Intrigue.
They had to move it because it was on the...
Were those Shriners?
Probably.
What were they all about?
I don't know, like my grandfather was in it, I thought it was like some secret society where you got to like ride a little tiny car. I have no idea. It's just that charity. Oh, it's a charity. Okay.
They were in Jersey.
And that's Alamin Game Farm. Let's see, is there a cheetah somewhere? There's cheetah. Apparently the city of Edmonton had to pass a specific bylaw to prevent Al from walking around the streets with his cheetah. There was no law against it. Yeah, sure. All right. So I spent some good time with my grandparents, and they've passed away, and I've moved on, and they are part of my fabric of who I am. And they've talked about a lot of the past, and I think that's why I have such an interest in heritage and history and all that jazz. And I was talking about how I met Marlena, and Marlena, if you want to wave, is sitting right here. Marlena introduced me to the Ortona Armory, where we are at today. I was very much interested in setting up a darkroom and step up my photography as an artist. Oh, did I even say I was an artist? I think I skipped that part. Morgana was telling me I should be. Okay, so I'm a multidisciplinary artist based here in Edmonton. I do photography. I do stereoscopy, which is 3D photography. I specialize in Viewmasters, which I've got two that I'm going to pass around. And yes, I've been here at the Ortona Armory since 2011, thanks to Marlena. And yes, it's been quite a... so I've set up a darkroom where I could print from my own negatives, as well as my grandmother's negatives and my great-grandmother's negatives, which has been a wonderful time here. And I must say, always keep the originals. It's really important to keep the originals. And I talked about Viewmasters, and I will pass around some Viewmasters here. And so... there's one Viewmaster where I'm actually making the Viewmaster. I used to have a peep show, a show to peep, at the Royal Bison Fair, where you could pay 25 cents to view a whole reel. And so a lot of people didn't believe me that I actually made these. So then I said, okay, well maybe I should just make one where I'm making a Viewmaster so people can believe me. And so that's this one here. So point it to a source of light, and there's 3D images that come out. And then here I have a Viewmaster of my first photo shoot here in the Ortona Armory, which is in the kitchen upstairs. If you have the opportunity, I strongly encourage to see it. It's a beautiful kitchen bar that has kept its 50s look. It's quite astounding. And so I did this in black and white. This was my first attempt at foam-pan film. Foam-pan film is this reversal black and white film made in Czechia. I think it's Czechia. There's Czechoslovakia, which became Czech Republic. Yeah, so I think Czech Republic or Czechia is the proper name now. I'm not sure, but yes. So I got this film from there, and it's quite a complex situation where in the middle of processing the film, you have to take off the cover, take the film out, and shine it to some light for a minute. and then put it back and put some chemistry to make it dance some more in the chemistry. And so, yes, so speaking about shooting in this building, so it's such a treat to be here and make art in this building. So this building was initially built as the Hudson's Bay Saddlery back in 1914. So they had horses running around in the hallway, and they had a warehouse too. So this was the home base for the Hudson's Bay, where they would deliver their goods with horses, with their delivery trucks, horse-driven delivery trucks. And so they operated here till 1927, I believe. And then it became the Edmonton Pure Butter Factory. So where you're sitting right now there was butter back in the late 20s. And there was so much butter that they had to move out of here. And then in the 30s, there was periods of being empty. And then it was a boys' reform school at one time. So if you were a naughty boy, chances are you came here to get spanked or something. I don't know. I don't know what they did back then. It was probably inappropriate. But probably some people don't have good memories of this building because of that. And so after that, the second war hit, World War II, and the federal government took over this building, and the Navy redid the whole inside of the building, which is the current layout that we have now. And it was called the HMCS Nonsuch. Nonsuch is also sans pareil. So there's no other building like this, there's no other ship like the HMCS Nonsuch, which was a Hudson's Bay ship back in the 1600s. And so, which is a very interesting name that they give to this building, because it's a very unique building in Edmonton. There's no other one like this. And the inside of this building has been the same for the past 80 years. All the tenants for the past 80 years have fulfilled their purposes and functions with the current layout, which is quite tremendous. One of the wonderful work Marlena has done in this building is she's identified what the rooms used to be. And so I think I have a printout of that right here. I have a few printouts that I can pass around. And so it's just interesting to see and to just to imagine, oh, this is what happened in this room. And so we have the room index here. And then we have a layout here. And another layout here of the building. And the Navy had it, and then the Army took it over, and then it was the federal government. And the National Film Board came in here because it was the federal government. And that's the first time that, or maybe the first time, but that's the drive that brought artists into the building to make films with the NFB. And while they're at it, well, this building's kind of got a classic look to it. Might as well shoot some stuff in here. And so, after the National Film Board was in here, the Trincan Steel Orchestra moved in shortly after. I think in 1977, a wonderful steel band. They moved out of here. We're all moving out at the end of the month here, because the building is going through some renos. And so the Trincan Steel Band has been here. And then it switched hands. So it belonged to the federal government, and then it went to the city. It was a swap, a land swap. You know where the Canada Place is? The Pink Palace, as they call it. It's got some pink windows. That land used to be the city of Edmonton. And so the city exchanged that land with the federal government in exchange of the three armories, the Prince of Wales Armory, the Ortona Armory, and the Strathcona Armory. And so that's how it got into the city's thing. And so once the city got it, they just rented it out for administration. There was some signage company in here. But naturally, organically, artists started to populate this building. And an arts community started to, to grow and develop in this building. You've got the Film and Video Arts Society that started and that occupied a big part of the building on the other side. And then you got sound composers, you've got ceramicists, you've got filmmakers, and you got photographers like me. that came into this building, and we've all occupied this building since. And what's interesting about this building is that the artists are the tenants that have occupied the building for the longest period of time, for the past 40 years. All the previous tenants were for shorter stints of it, which is an interesting thing to realize. I realized that last week, I think. So there's been countless of film productions and photo shoots in this building. This building inspires and informs us of our process. It enriches our process and has really been influential in our lives as artists and community members here. And so the inside layout has been as it is since 1939. Let's see, we've embraced the layout, and I'm just speaking off the cuff here, just looking at my notes, I'm sorry. And so yes, so now we are at a state where 5 minutes, super, I'm going to wrap it up with preservation notes. I'm going to talk about preservation, finally. So, speaking about how this building has been such a tremendous influence, and how we've organically grown a wonderful community, a very diverse community in culture and demographics, in ages as well, and genders as well. The city will be renovating this building. And their initial approach was to gut and renovate. And so the shell is protected under a municipal resource designation. However, the inside is not. There are certain aspects of it that are under the bylaw, but since there is asbestos, there's asbestos in here. Yeah, it's not in the air right now. There's no danger to you right now, but there's asbestos, and we understand as artists and the arts community that there has to be work done here. The mechanicals are failing. The heating, we lost about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 radiators the last cold spell. There was like a really cold spell in February. Well, the boiler shut down, some of the radiators froze and they broke. And so radiators have to be updated, the electrical, the plumbing has to be updated, so the mechanicals have to be updated, and we realize that. But we've been really encouraging the city to try to preserve as much as possible in the inside, because that's what's cool about this building. A lot of people walk into this building and tell us, wow, there's kind of this weird energy here. You can just feel that there's been so much history going on here. And is there ghosts? Some people wonder if there's ghosts. Yeah, there's the ghosts of our community. There's been so much activity here and energy that hasn't left the building. It's been just hovering around, just ready to welcome anybody to come in. And so we've been really trying to encourage the city to have a preservation approach versus a generic approach of gutting and renovating. And so there's been a definition of preservation that's been, I've been brainstorming this theme all week. And so somebody gave me a definition. So preservation involves keeping an object from destruction and seeing it that the object is not permanently altered or changed. The word preservation is most commonly used in relation to architecture and built environments. Preservation dictates that in order to retain the maximum amount of building fabric, repairs must be done with like materials and if possible using the same methods as first created. So we see as, to preserve this building, the mechanicals would be updated by taking them out and then putting some back in without necessarily removing the walls or the current naval layout or just restoring whatever is ripped out. And so that's kind of how I feel personally, and I'm kind of sad to leave. I still got 15 days in here. You can check out my studio. I think I'm going to move at midnight on the 31st of May. And so, yes, there's a few quotes here that I'd like to share that some people have shared in the past week that really resonates with myself and some members of this community. So don't gild the lily. This is a beautiful lily of a building, very unique. Why pretend to save our heritage when we can actually do it? We can do it here. And the plans that the city has given us, well, they're kind of over the top, it seems. They're going to cover the courtyard, which is too bad. They're going to call it the atrium, and then they're going to make some holes in the walls. So there's going to be a giant hole in this wall that you'll be able to go in the courtyard. There's a door there. I prefer to take the door. And then they're going to make giant holes in the ceiling. I don't know why. It's a thing. So, I showed the plans to somebody, and then they said this. This is not me. I'm quoting somebody else, but they didn't want me to say who they are. But if you want to build a freaky-ass building, then just build a new freaky-ass building. So yes, that's. I think that covers it.